best stuff, the best military in the world, where are we safe? So the question is, who will you find your sense of safety in? The empire or the Lamb? And I think this is the question to the first century church, and it's the question to us today too. Who are you going to get your safety from? Because we all know, our world is like just descending into chaos at the moment. You look at what's happening in Israel right now, and it is like, I sent my wife the meme of the dominoes falling. It is dominoes falling, It's crazy out there. And this is the way that all empires act, is how the white horse gets lived out. And so here's the deal. No matter how much you build up your white horse power and prestige, it never goes away. The threat's always going to be there. There's always going to be other white horses coming for you. It doesn't matter how bad and big and bold your white horse empire is. There's always other horses. And then next is a red horse. This is fun. Revelation 6, 3-4. When he opened the second seal, I heard the second living creature say, "Come." And came out another horse. And out came another horse, bright red. Its rider was permitted to take peace from the earth so that people should slay one another. And he was given a great sword. So if the white horse is the threat from the outside that makes Rome freak out, the Parthians, then the red horse is the threat from within. If you read any Roman history at all, you'll know that they are always executing insurgents. It's one of Rome's favorite things to do. They execute insurgents. In fact, these are some of the fake charges that were brought against Jesus because they can't afford to have this battle happening, this civil war happening inside of the empire. Because if civil war happens again, like it did for Rome way earlier, if it happens again, then guess what? Their borders are open and there's a threat from the white horse. So they can't stand to have civil war. So you always need to build this movement and this power of crushing your internal enemies. Rome had some of the most sophisticated spying networks. I would say under King Herod, it was much more like the Gestapo and any of these systems because they spied on their own people, always concerned about who was going to build up against the empire. Always concerned about who would go up against what the empire says. So imagine with me a system of government that's always worried about the threat from within. For Rome, this is the biggest threat there was because civil war would absolutely ruin them. It would make the threat of invasion way higher. And you always have to put down that threat. It's the politic that once you have your power, you got to keep it. You got to keep it at all costs. Think about the regimes through history that practiced the politic of the red horse. The Russians had the Gulag, right? They had to stop the people from rising up in their own system, so we got to silence them. Pol Pot killed all of his enemies, and North Korea has execution and work camps. It's just, the point isn't to point to a specific empire here and be like, oh, the red horse. And many of you have heard this, by the way, if you've paid attention to Jesus coming back systems, end time systems. Many people have oh, the red horse, it's definitely Russia. And I've heard this before. And I'm going to tell you, it's not Russia. And it is Russia. And it's not China, but it is China. And it's not the point of the horses, you guys, is that this is how every empire acts. Every empire in world history just simply acts this way. And the point is, do you want to act like these horses, or do you want to live like them, or do you want to live like the lamb? That's the point. In fact, a great case study in how all the horses work out, and many commentators will, is that the horses are all in this sort of descending order. Like when war happens, then there's civil unrest, and then there's all these other things that happen. World War I is a perfect example of this, and this is why when World War I happened, many people are like, well, Jesus is coming back today. There was this massive movement built around Jesus coming back at World War I because there was World War I, and guess what? All these nations, the white horse freaked out. The white horse went crazy, and all these empires are fighting each other, and then guess what? 1917 hit, the Russian Revolution. There was a civil war. And it was crazy. And then the rise of communism, all that stuff. And then what happened? Oh, then there was famine, the turnip winter in Germany and all these other places. They only had turnip seed. They barely had any food because war decimated the food population. We're going to talk about that next. And then lastly, the Spanish flu, 1918. Killed off a bunch of people. That's all 4 horsemen right there. The idea is that as empires try and hold on to this power and control, this is something that's happened in every empire and every time of our world. It's not something that's specific to 21st century right now. And I'll tell you this, even though we are always closer to Jesus returning, it is biblically improper to point to one nation and say, that's the nation that this is talking about. And I'll tell you why. Because the first readers of the book of Revelation could have never understood that. And so what you're saying is the book is only intelligible to our generation, first century. Okay, I'm getting into professor mode. Let me get back into pastor mode. Okay. So this is your next film. The politic of the red horse asks us where we will find true peace, in the empire or in the Lamb. Where will you find true peace? In the empire or the Lamb? And by the way, the empires of this world are going to test you on this. As world events start to freak out, as the world starts to go crazy, it's going to test you on this. And do you really trust in the Lamb? Or do you trust in military spending? What do you trust in? Amen. Okay. Black horse, verses 5-6. When he opened the 3rd seal, I heard the 3rd living creature say, "Come." And I looked, and behold, a black horse, and its rider had a pair of scales in his hand. And I heard what seemed to be a voice in the midst of 4 living creatures say, "A quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, and do not harm the olive oil and the wine." This is the horse of famine. So back to Pharaoh and his mythology of control and power, he had this mythology that he controlled by his hand. He controlled the economy because Pharaoh was the breadbasket of the ancient world. They took care of, you have to understand, in the end of Genesis, when there was a famine, where did everybody go for food? They went to Egypt. Egypt was the breadbasket. Pharaoh had the control. There was the mythology of we're in control of all this stuff, right? And what the text is saying here is it takes about a full day's wages, a denarius, just to feed one person. And that's what happens when the empire's horsemen go out of control. When all of these horses go out of control and these agents of evil go out of control and judgment is starting to happen and all that stuff. Food is scarce. The economy, inflation starts to go crazy. That's why one denarius for one person's food, how am I going to feed my entire family? It's World War II, when right before the outbreak of World War II, Germans said they would take wheelbarrows full of cash to buy a loaf of bread because inflation went out of control. This is what happened when human systems run amok. There's this note, not to touch the oil and the wine. Here's the strange thing about famine. It seems like the wealthiest always seem to have plenty of food, oil, and wine, right? I think about one nation where there is a famine happening right now. And I'm not saying that this horse applies to that nation. I'm not saying that. You just heard my rant. That's biblically improper. I'm not doing that. It's just an example. North Korea.